not one, but two microphones here. Somebody didn't know me well, apparently. Those of you who know me well know that I don't need a microphone. I'm Melody Rose, and I'm the founder and director of the Center for Women, Politics, and Policy at Portland State University. And that's why they gave me two mics, because apparently I can't operate them very well. Is that working?
Yeah.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Is it working?
It's still muted.
Still muted. Let's just turn it off. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Still muted.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm Melody Rose, the founder and director of the Center for Women, Politics, and Policy, and it's my distinct pleasure and honor to kick off this very important event this afternoon. I'm going to leave most of the introductory remarks to my dear friend and colleague Patricia Schechter, but I just wanted to first welcome you all here and tell you how important this is. This event is both to the center, which runs what I think is going to be a real foremost speaker series in women and politics and policy that we call the Abigail Scott Duniway Speaker Series, but also to our partners. And I think it's very apropos that at this event this afternoon we have a lively and rich partnership between the Center and the Black Studies Department and the University Library and the Multicultural Center. And of course, Patricia represents the History Department as well. So we have a wonderful and rich partnership in the room today, which seems very much appropriate to today's remarks. And so I just wanted to call that to your attention. And I also just wanted to say a few brief words of introduction of my friend Patricia Schechter, who will be doing the introduction of our dear friend Avel Gordly, whom many of you know in this room. And I'm very proud to turn the microphone over to my colleague Patricia, who is a dear friend and stalwart co-conspirator of many activities on this campus. Patricia is an historian of very great renown. Her work centers on women in politics and race. She is an expert in the history of African American women, has done quite a lot of engaged teaching and scholarship in the Portland metropolitan region, working with such organizations as the YWCA and nurses and others. And really, I think in many ways symbolizes what I think of as those conjoined or concentric circles at PSU around teaching, research, and service. All of those activities for Patricia are very tightly knit, and you see that in everything that she does and in all the ways that she serves in our community. So I'm very pleased to turn the microphone over to Associate Professor of History, Patricia Schechter, and let her kick off this wonderful event.
Thank you so much. I'm not supposed to touch this one. I don't touch this microphone.
Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. Like this? Okay. Sorry. Good afternoon. Let me echo Melody and very warmly welcome you this afternoon to this special event and to this special place. A special place on this campus, the Multicultural Center. I just want to acknowledge John Joyner and Saeed Haji and the other staff who worked hard to make today possible, but also over the years have really worked hard to invest this space with meaning and with history and resonance for our community. So please join me in thanking John Joyner and the MCC. I had the pleasure of serving on the board a few years ago, and I know John's going to not rest till I get back on the horse there, and I look forward to that. I know, I own it. So, and a few more thank yous, if I might, before my very short remarks today. First to Avel Gordly for embracing me so warmly and fully in this historical journey we've shared together now for over 4 years. Thank you so much. And to Melody Rose, of course, for her leadership and her can-do and her confidence about having us stretch here at PSU to make things be, like archives and books and centers that would not have otherwise existed without her vision. I also want to thank OSU Press and Tom Booth and all the wonderful staff there who were models, I think, of deeply humane professionalism and just plain nice people to work with in Corvallis, another kind of partnership across space and time, but PSU. I want to thank the bookstore for being here to help support PSU authors in days when most things are virtual. It's nice to have a bookstore that's proud to support and showcase PSU authors. And I want to finally acknowledge my history department colleagues and students who are here today with gratitude for support and engagement with my career over these many years, 16 years now. So I've taught at Portland State for 16 years, as I just said, and my job description, technically, if you looked at my letter of offer, it would say to teach U.S. women's history. But that title shadows really my primary professional commitment over these years, as Melody already alluded to, which is African American women's history. That's the field where I do most of my research and publishing. And in that spirit, it's my task today to say a little bit about what that means, what went into making a book like this, a marvelous book. What did it take to bring this to completion? So I have on my notes here, it's my job to say a word about this, but I really need 3 words. My job is, by the way, to make Avel giggle. That's the secret to our success. She keeps me grounded, I make her laugh. So my words, and I'll keep this brief, are commitment, competency, and collaboration. The commitment piece is embodied in the 3 years of archival work that stand behind this book. And you have a sampling of some of the wonderful pieces from the Avel Gordly papers that are housed at Portland State Library. Without the gift of Avel's papers to the library and Black Studies Department in 2007, this project probably would not be done, at least today, maybe in the future, but the timing and the sort of momentum for this book really grew out of the gift of Avel's papers. And again, credit to Black Studies, to the wonderful librarians and archivists who've helped us over there, and again to Melody too, who was really paving the way there to make sure the library could be the kind of repository for women's lives and histories, to make sure PSU was a kind of destination for women's history. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Gordly gift to PSU Library and Black Studies will change the way history is practiced in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The second dimension of how we got here today has to do with competency. I simply refer to my training as a scholar. I would have never tackled some of the challenges of organizing an archival collection without things like professional mentoring. I didn't learn how to build archives in graduate school. They took my money for something else. But it was on-the-job training, thanks to Doug Erickson at Lewis & Clark, who's the college archivist and who mentored me for many years. Chris Paschild, our own university archivist, who Doug and Chris are not just excellent professionals, but engaging and open-minded humanists whom I feel lucky to count as friends. Soon after we got building on the archives, it came out between Avel and me that my graduate school mentor was a scholar named Nell Irvin Painter, who held an endowed chair in the history department at Princeton University for many years. And as a well-informed reader of African American history, Avel knew all about Professor Painter and her amazing scholarly career. And knowing that I was her student, I think, was a piece of that competency. It was a piece of the puzzle that made our collaboration that much more powerful and full of promise. I also like to think of it as part of the collaboration, broadly understood, that across the many miles between here and Newark, New Jersey, where Nell lives, she was still in our lives enough to offer. She read the manuscript and she offered to blurb the book and really help give it the kind of visibility and currency in academic circles that we're really excited to have. And finally, collaboration, which I think is already a theme today. As I've mentioned, Avel embraced me as a partner, a full partner, in the telling of her story, and I consider this to be really one of the great honors of my career. If any of you have done oral history, I know there's a few of my students out there, I know who you are, but other folks who have done interviewing or oral history or worked with life narratives, you know that work requires trust, it requires rapport, And these are very delicate and very personal and intimate components of, our life as thinking, breathing people. And I'm thrilled to say that as our rapport blossomed over our interview time and our collaboration, our relationship has become a very, very special friendship and one I treasure deeply. Of course, in our interview process, we also had great examples to model. Nell Painter's also an oral historian and biographer, and there's many other wonderful, really exemplary feminist practitioners of oral history like Shirley Gluck and Gwen Etter-Lewis, who some of my students in the audience have already read. And just finally, on the note of collaboration, again, I want to call out Black Studies and colleagues and students from across the university in our classes who helped advance some of this work last winter in oral history class, and especially Megan Clay, who generously gave of her time and talent to make sure that Avel's legacy reached its fullest potential. And we're not done yet. There's more to come. Stay tuned for online components and other wonderful iterations of the Gordly papers and the energy that they will continue to generate in our community. But today, we are very lucky, and I am so honored to celebrate a real high point in this journey, the publication of Avel Gordly's memoir, which is part of her legacy to PSU and the community at large. So won't you please join me in welcoming her to the podium. A lot of water.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And can you hear me okay through this this microphone? Yes? Okay, you got to talk back to me now. Okay. There are some folks in the audience that I've had a chance to say hello to, and some other folks have walked in, and I want to acknowledge you. Starting over here on my left, and I'm going to come back to Melody. Rosalind Farrington. Stand up, Rosalind. Rosalind is part of the faculty of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies here at Portland State University. And she is a former director of the Commission for Women for the state of Oregon. And it has been a joy to come to be here at Portland State and discover and rediscover talent, genius, creativity, like Rosalind's. Since my coming to Portland State. So thank you for being here today to support this event, Rosalind, and let us know what we can do to support your work on campus. And then I see a couple of my former students. I'm going to ask them to both stand. And if there are other students, stand as well, if I'm missing anybody. And I'm blanking on your name. Tasha, of course, Tasha, took the joint class that Patricia and I taught on oral memoirs, and you did an excellent piece of work in that course. It's good to see you today. I hope that things are going well for you on campus, and come by, let me know, let us know how things are going. Amira Flint, and her wonderful son, Amira, graduated. Amira was chair of the Student Fee Committee on this campus and had responsibility for how many millions? Was it 25, 24? 14. Did an excellent job of bringing more transparency to the Student Fee Committee process, and let her leadership light shine. It's good to see you today, too. And Phil Kiesling, former Secretary of State, another Oregon public servant, another light who's found his way back to Portland State, don't we all? Seems to be the case, Kate Brown. Former Secretary of State, now in the Hatfield School of Government. And I will just say briefly that initially I thought I might land at the Hatfield School of Government, but the invitation came first from the Black Studies Department. And so there's still opportunities for a marriage to happen between Black Studies and the Hatfield School of Government, so I'm just going to let you sit with that. And when we finally have our meeting, because we've been trading emails, we can talk some more about what that might look like. And do I see Chaz from the Chief Diversity Officer's office? Folks see you. And Ed Washington. Ed, former Metro counselor here in Portland and Multnomah County, and someone who has been a wonderful friend and advised me over the years, these many years. Kay Turan. I know there's a book in you. We just got through talking about it. If you don't know Kay Turan's story, it's hers to tell, and I know that she's going to. She is getting busy with her own book. This is one of the most thoughtful, again, brilliant, creative public servants in the state of Oregon, in our nation, in fact. She's a national leader. She serves as head of Volunteers of America. Did I get it right? Yes. And Kate, just stand up and let the students see you, who are from George School. George School, George Middle School students, stand up over there and be recognized. And we're so glad that you all are here today. My colleague and professor, Gibson. Stand up, tell people who you are and where you are.
I'm Karen Gibson. I'm an associate professor in the School of Urban Studies and Planning.
Yes, yes. And we had some fun stirring up a little pot at the Portland Development Commission a few months back. You're doing exceptional work, extraordinary work, especially around community development, community building, and introducing our PSU students to that world and how to speak the language that is spoken in that public policy world. Kate Brown, our current Secretary of State. Please stand up, Kate. We served together for many years in the Oregon Legislature, came into the House around the same time, way back in 1991.
2 months ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
You were in September, I was in November.
Yeah. Kate won her election by, what was it, 6 votes?
7.
7 votes? Every vote counts. And that's another story that needs to be documented. Not just the story of the election, but the story of your public service, Kate, so get busy. And it's not my intent to leave out anyone. Those are the faces I can recognize and connect with a name in this moment. And I see Angela Canton in the back from the Black Studies Office. She is our executive assistant. Angela, thank you so much for all that you do for us in the Black Studies Department. She just delivered some newsletters that tell the story of the work that we're doing now in the department, so please pick that up and take it with you and share it with others. Let me start by saying this. We in the Black Studies Department are celebrating 40 years on this campus. 40 years. And one of our professors has been with the department for 36 of those years, and that's Dr. Darrell Milner, who is also a former chair of the department. We exist as a department because on the heels of the civil rights movement, students demanded courses and demanded a program that later became a department. We exist because students wanted to see it happen on this campus. We exist as a department because the 21st century demands that we produce culturally competent graduates who will know that traditional interpretations and study of world history have bypassed the African experience. We are still doing that work. 40 years later, we're still about the work of correcting these omissions from history. And therein lies the importance, the significance of having a Black Studies department on this campus. The Black Studies Department is an academic interdisciplinary unit within the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. The primary focus is the social sciences and liberal arts. Our mission has always included a valued component of outreach efforts directed toward metropolitan community needs. And the most recent and significant example of our research and scholarship applies to our work with the Urban League of Portland in developing the State of Black Oregon report, which I believe many of you are familiar with. Let me ask the question. How many of you are familiar with the State of Black Oregon, the Urban League report? How many of you have read the report? Okay. And how many of you are working to advance implementation of the recommendations in the report? That's our work. That's our work to do together. In addition, our department is devoted to the exploration and analysis of the history, politics, and culture of African people in the United States, the Caribbean, and Africa. We seek to objectively explore the Black experience, to illuminate the contributions of African people to world culture, and to provide an alternative to traditional interpretations and approaches to the study of world history. Our objectives include providing comprehensive learning programs aimed at greater understanding of all people of the Black experience, past, present, and future. And the Department of Black Studies seeks to expose students from all cultural, religious, and ethnic backgrounds to academic experiences beyond those generally found in traditional college curricula. So again, please pick up our newsletter. It was important for me to make these statements to you today so that you have a better understanding than perhaps you had when you walked into the room, a better understanding about the history and the Black Study Department missions and goals. I want to thank everyone associated with planning this event, especially Melody Rose, Nova, newcomer. Where are you, Nova? There she is. Patricia Schechter, and I want to thank all of you for attending and supporting this activity in our PSU community this afternoon. And as I begin to read from Remembering the Power of Words, I'd like to start with four quotes at the beginning of the book. And these are quotes that speak deeply to me. They resonate deeply within me. Listen to these words. First, from Frederick Douglass. I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and to incur my own abhorrence. Frederick Douglass. While we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, The weight of that silence will choke us. Audre Lorde. Successful leadership depends on a fundamental shift of being, including a deep commitment to the dream and a passion for serving versus being driven by the pursuit of status and power. Joseph Jaworski, founder of the American Leadership Forum. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy, 1st chapter, 7th verse, King James Version. And so I shared those quotes with you as a way of framing the rest of my remarks with you this afternoon. I'll begin by reading from the acknowledgments. And Patricia, you know this is coming to you from my heart, the deepest part of my heart. And I want to share with all of you what I wrote in the book about Patricia. I said, thank you to one who has become a dear sister friend, who knows all the family secrets, Patricia Schechter, for the love, inspiration, trust, mentoring, laughter, and patience that led to our writing this book together. As I shared my story through hours of taped interviews at my office in the Black Studies Department at Portland State University, it was always with the knowledge that I was speaking to a joyously, respectfully engaged open heart and mind. I found much healing and release in telling my story. And here I must acknowledge another brilliant sister friend and healer, Renee Mitchell, whose invitation to participate in a day-long conference, Redefining the Blues, provided an additional catalyst to keep going forward with this memoir and to start planning for a second one that would talk more specifically about contemporary Black women and the experience of living in the Pacific Northwest. The journey toward healing can be difficult, even for accomplished Black women in a society that does not always recognize and appreciate the full lives that we live. Overcoming the silences that doom us to spiritual and physical death is essential for recovery and survival, especially in Oregon, where a liberal and progressive white majority culture can smother and choke off our voices. I am deeply grateful to my beloved sister, Faye Birch, for being an anchor, a truth teller, and the first to read the manuscript that became this book. Thanks to my beloved sister friend, Bea McMillan, who read the manuscript during our wonderful healing visit in her home in Columbus, Ohio, February 2009. And thanks to my lifelong sister friend, Charlotte Rutherford, retired administrative law judge for the state of Oregon. For writing the foreword, Charlotte is the daughter of Oregon civil rights pioneers, Otto and Verdell Rutherford. I am thankful to my colleagues in the Black Studies Department who provided me with so much encouragement over the last 2 years, especially our department chair, Dr. E. Kofi Agorsa, Dr. Daryl Milner, Taria Autry, Dr. Pedro Ferbel Escarate, Walida Emarisha, Dr. Ethan Johnson, Dr. Joseph Smith Buwani, Dr. Dalton Miller-Jones, Angela Canton, my remarkable teaching assistant and former legislative intern, Megan Clay, who is now a master's student in communication here on this campus. moving forward to chapter one, I'll read a small section of chapter 1, which is titled Before We Become Dust. Before We Become Dust. Growing up, finding my own voice was tied up with denying my voice or having it forcefully rejected. And in all of that, the memory of my father is very strong. To this day, and I am today a very experienced public speaker, preparation to speak takes a great deal of energy. A lot of the energy is dedicated to overcoming fear and the pain of injury previously inflicted on me for speaking up. Over the years, I have developed some sure ways to find my voice, catch my breath, and start to speak. Sometimes I think prayerfully of the names of my mother, Beatrice Bernice Gordly, and of my grandmothers, Alberta Louise Randolph and Leslie Gordly. Sometimes I say their names to myself, sometimes I speak them aloud, as I do now. I say the names with thanks and gratitude to God. Saying their names always centers me. Sometimes I start my remarks by dedicating my words to honor their memory, and I do so in this moment. I'm reading now a section from chapter 4, which is titled, Them Changes. My mom was always, I should go back and say that the time frame is 1971. How many of you were alive in 1971? Okay, how many were not alive in 1971? Aha, okay. My mom was always supportive, and my sister was the same way, even while she was away at the University of Oregon. Sometimes I went back and forth to visit Faye and Eugene. Sometimes she came home. Along the way, I developed a desire to go back to school. In addition to my sister's enticing college career, I had a close girlfriend, Mildred Jones, who was already enrolled at Portland State University. She was having quite an experience, and I wanted some of that. I wanted to increase my education. I was very aware that education was tied to the quality of life that I would be able to give Ty, my son, who at that time was 5 years old. Mildred's friendship meant a great deal to me in my phone company days. She too was a reader. She invited me to visit Portland State University, and I attended 1 or 2 classes with her. I remember being in an amphitheater-style classroom and looking down at the professor. Being in a place of learning was exciting to me, as was seeing other black students on campus. I had been working for Pacific Northwest Bell in the old 1900 building for close to 5 years. With Mildred's example before me, I realized that I did not want to be there for the 5-year pen and flowers. Some people at the company questioned my decision to leave such a good job with benefits. But the 5-year pen, or the 20-year pen, just signaled to me something about small horizons, even if I couldn't quite name it at the time. Something in my head said that if I stayed, I would be stuck. I also decided that I did not want any ceremony about leaving. I just wanted to go. Part of me had already deeply rejected that place. I remember well that when Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered, not everybody at work was sorry that he had been killed. There is still heaviness around that tragedy for me. So by the time I determined to leave the company for higher education, I knew I did not want to celebrate with those people. I just wanted out. At the same time, my family and friends had become even more invested in my success on the job. In that last year of work, I had been selected for a management training program for testing computer technology. It was a big deal. People thought that wanting to leave was nuts, especially since I was leaving for the big question mark of higher education. But I was not looking at it that way at all. I was excited about coming to campus and joining Mildred and the other Black students. In retelling this passage today, my mind is drawn to the memory of a friend who asked me in another workplace setting, "Is this job big enough for you?" It was my friend Norm Monroe. Even at that later time, more than a decade after I left the phone company, I was stunned by his words. I almost took them as an affront, as I was then ensconced in highly valued work at the Urban League of Portland. I responded to promptings in myself about a bigger life by intuition, rather than out loud. That brought conflict. And of course, I had been socialized in Portland, Oregon, where racism and sexism and paternalism tell Black women every day that we belong over there, away from choices and opportunities in life. When I enrolled at Portland State, I had loans and grants and worked part-time. I had key punch training, so I became a key punch operator and worked downtown 4 to midnight while going to school. My mom took care of Ty, and that's how I made ends meet. For a short time, I was on welfare for the health care benefits and food stamps. It was embarrassing for me to collect benefits even though I had earned them, and this experience and memory stuck with me when I entered the legislative and policy world. My first year at Portland State was really significant because I met people who decisively influenced my thinking and life choices for the next 20 years. I took courses in the Black Studies department and was introduced to a literature that I was totally unfamiliar with and that I just thrived on. I was in a setting with Black professors. That experience was new. I had only had one Black teacher in my public school education. My poetry class with Primus St. John was transformational. I was keeping a journal and writing a great deal, including poetry. I was able to share my writing in this class and have my voice affirmed in a public way. I stood up and shared my poems with the class and also one-on-one with Primus. Receiving constructive critique was such an affirming experience, one of the first deeply affirming intellectual experiences I ever had in an educational setting. By contrast, I had an experience in the Women's Studies program at PSU that was very uncomfortable and negative. I took a course with Mildred, and we did a project that involved interviews with a group of Black women in the community. We promised these women that we would share the information in the class. We played a tape recording of their stories, but said that we would keep the tape in our own possession. The instructor insisted, however, that if we did not turn in the tape, it was going to affect our grade and that we would only get a C. We agreed to take the lower grade rather than break our promise to the women we interviewed. Here was a lesson about having Black women's words appropriated and our communal ethos violated, which Mildred and I successfully resisted. Clearly, however, during my PSU years, it hit me that my college choices meant leaving behind girlfriends from grade school and high school. As time went on, I was not connected to them in the same way. We began living in different worlds. even though we occupied the same demographic space of the Portland Black community or neighborhood. As I shifted my educational standing and employment prospects, white folks raised their own questions like, "Are you from here? You don't seem like you are from here." I'm never sure exactly what that means, but the effect is one of suspicion, alienation, and even rejection. I was part of a group of PSU students who found each other and created community. Black Studies faculty communicated that we belonged on campus, and in their classes affirmed that there was a place for us and for what we had to say. A few of us active Black students on campus had known each other from the community in Northeast Portland. A few of us had actually gone to Girls Polytechnic High School together. At PSU, we also formed study groups. I was focused on getting through successfully and worked at claiming and being claimed as a part of a community that tried to help other students get through. I also remember the encouragement of professors like Phil McLaurin, head of the Black Studies then program. Faculty also took the time to make sure that we had our financial aid packages together, as well as any other support that we needed to do well on the campus. The Black students active in campus organizations created a comfortable space for ourselves. Aside from that connection, I was not tied into the general campus community life. If I wasn't in class, I was working. If I wasn't working, I was studying. If I wasn't studying, I was sleeping or taking care of Ty. Black students worked hard to create a sense of community, but outside the space of our offices, Black Cultural Affairs and the Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship Fund, we felt alien. The pride associated with this scholarship fund touched us on and off the campus. One year, I received an award for my work on the fund, and it was a welcome acknowledgement. There was a relationship between some of the pastors and organizations in the African American community and our campus groups. I was aware of organized, planned events, but I was not involved at that level of participation. One press conference involved Dennis Payne, who was an activist on campus who helped found the Black Studies program, Reverend John Jackson, and a whole host of other community people were also involved. And what I want to say here is that Reverend John Jackson is no longer living. His archive, the story of his life is held at Portland Community College, Cascade campus, including his library at Portland Community College, Cascade campus. I encourage students, I encourage community members to visit that campus and to become familiar with what's there that reflects the life of this great man, the late Reverend John Jackson. During college, I lived in a little one-bedroom apartment at Northeast Sacramento Street between what is now Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Northeast 7th Avenue. The apartment complex was called Prue Ray Gardens. And at the time, I was very conscious and proud of living in housing that was named after two Black doctors, Dr. Pruitt and Dr. Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds was my father's doctor. I was aware of the significance of that history, and by living there, I took strength from that history. The naming was significant to me. My learning in Black Studies, let me go back. At the same time that I'm having this experience with Portland State University and the enriching experience in the Black Studies department, I'm still dealing with feelings of inadequacy tied to the script of racism and sexism inside me that played like old tapes. My learning in Black studies helped quiet some of these tapes. Extremely important to me was finding language to discuss taboo subjects like skin color and hair texture. In Black studies, these subjects actually came up in our classes. One professor asked us students, does skin color matter in the Black community? And how does the issue get talked about in the Black community? I remember a huge discussion around skin color and my relief at being able to discuss color consciousness. I was able to make much clearer connections about assumptions I'd grown up with, like my mom's light skin and features and how she was always talked about as a beautiful woman. In Black studies, we analyzed how these judgments get played out in the community at large. So in an historical sense and also in a personal sense, I connected historical references to darker skinned women as being less than or part of a certain social class, and women with lighter skin as part of another social class. I now understood that these judgments were tied to real status issues like club memberships and other social privileges. Black studies introduced a language to frame questions about many things, about race and power, and that I only silently observed while growing up. My college education was driven by a curiosity, a love of reading, and a real urgency about all there was to know. I was introduced to writers like Ralph Ellison and Zora Neale Hurston. Years later, I would visit Hurston's hometown in a museum named for her in Eatonville, Florida. I was excited to find myself, so to speak, in the history of Black people on the pages of all those books we were assigned to read. I also experienced feelings of loss and anger, like, why didn't I get this in high school? And how do I get caught up? Almost 40 years later, this is an aside, almost 40 years later, as a legislator, I would be invited to write an essay on the need for cultural competency in education. This was an essay for the New York Times online newspaper. And I was compelled to write this essay titled, "We Need to Know Our History," after hearing a high school student, a young Black woman, say in a meeting with concerned community people, concerned about the quality of education our young people are receiving in public education. Heard this young woman say, "We don't know who we are. We don't know our history. All we know is that we were slaves. We don't know who we are. We need to know our history." And so the piece I wrote for the New York Times was entitled, "We Need to Know Our History." The point is, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work. We put, and again, this is back in the PSU Black Studies days. We put effort into our appearance, and for me, self-presentation was also about being ready to go to my job from school. I always carried a big bag or two with me for books, always something to write with, often my journal, and always something to read, always. Appearance was about being taken seriously on campus and representing our family and community. We knew we were downtown at the university and that we just couldn't show up unprepared. I'm reading now from chapter 5, which is titled Operation Crossroads Africa. And how am I doing on time? Am I okay? Black community connections at PSU included the African diaspora. Dr. Ino Ukeji of Nigeria taught in Black Studies and presented to me the opportunity to participate with Operation Crossroads Africa, a premier student exchange program founded in 1958 by Dr. James H. Robinson, an African-American Christian minister. I applied for the program, was accepted, and even had women in the community, Friends of Africa, raise funds on my behalf. I feel blessed to have had a mother who was so clear with me about it all. You are going to take this trip. My son was around 5 years old at the time, but she and my dad, my mom and my dad and sister, would make sure that Ty was okay, and that was a gift. My sojourn to West Africa turned out to be a life-changing experience. I participated with students from all over the United States, over 100 total, and we were split into groups of about a dozen. The Crossroads program was in its way multicultural. Black and white students from different parts of the United States took part. We had our orientation at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and going there was my first experience traveling alone, away from home. I had to present myself to strangers in a strange land. Making this first journey east gave me the confidence to later return to search out my brother in New York, and that's another story in the memoir. As an asset I brought with me to the Crossroads Africa experience was my temperament as a quiet observer. I took it all in, kept my journal, and took pictures. My experience in Africa was profoundly life-altering in terms of values like materialism and consumerism. It also fired my desire to learn more about African history and culture. I remember writing a promise to myself in one of my journals that one day I would be able to share what I know and travel back to Africa. I've been very intentional about keeping that promise through 4 trips to 17 nations on the continent. When I returned to Portland State, I reconnected with my political science major. I was drawn to the subject matter out of curiosity, and it just seemed to fit me. Then I met Dr. Lee Brown, who was the head of the department called Law Enforcement. He encouraged me to take one of his courses, and I did. Lee Brown alerted me to the fact that law enforcement was a field with emerging careers for women and people of color. He invited me to be a part of the cadre of people who would break through this largely segregated employment area. An additional incentive was the LEAP program, or Law Enforcement Assistance Program, which would cover student loans for those who went to work in the field. I enjoyed Lee Brown's courses immensely because he challenged us to think critically, to write and express ourselves clearly, and to go out into the community and engage. Lee Brown also brought into our classroom wonderful speakers who embodied the best in the profession, and he was very personally engaging, in addition to being a towering presence in the field. Eventually, police commissioner of Atlanta, and then the city of New York, and the first African American to hold that position. He went on to become mayor of Houston, not Portland, Houston. We let him get away. We did that. And I also studied with Dr. Gary Pearlstein, and he became another mentor. I just loved and admired them both, and to this day they remain my friends and people who have followed my progress. The sun was shining on the day I graduated from Portland State University. I have some beautiful photographs of the occasion, spectacular black and whites in my family collection. The pictures show pride in the eyes of my mom and dad and my grandmother. The day after I graduated from Portland State University, I went to work for the State Corrections Division. My job in Oregon Corrections came to me through Dr. Pearlstein, one of the other people at PSU who had let me know that my voice mattered, that my voice counted. He let me know early on in my career as a student that he appreciated my critical thinking skills and ability. And shortly after I graduated, we served on a corrections-based committee, and I ended up voting no on some contentious matter before the group. And I remember him expressing pride to me that I was able to stand by my principles in a room full of people where I could have easily been intimidated into just going along with the majority. Dr. Pearlstein had told me about employment openings in the Corrections Division and encouraged me to apply for a position. Dr. Brown provided me with a reference. Were it not for their mentoring, I probably would not have changed my major to administration of justice and gone in that career direction. I wasn't interested in police work on the street, so to speak, but more interested in corrections and the community side. And so the day after graduation from PSU, I had a job waiting. And I went to work in the State Corrections Division as a counselor in a work release facility for women coming out of prison. Women coming out of prison and then to the Portland Women's Center, located in Northwest Portland. Part of my job involved traveling to the women's prison and interviewing women for the program for education and work release. I quickly sized up the racist bias of the screening process, since most of the women wound up on work release. Most of the black women wound up on work release, and the white women wound up on education release. Work release was far more punitive. Being unemployed 30 days after release from prison resulted in the client's remand back to the institution. Calling this bias racism was my first experience of taking on the system in the interest of equity. It was also my first experience with pushback from those who preferred the status quo and who questioned the legitimacy of my criticism. I heard things like, "What are you doing?" And nobody else has raised this, so what's the big deal? To meet these challenges, I got community people involved. I assembled an advisory board for the program with members representing the different kinds of services that women needed to transition back to the community. These included the faith and social services communities, and one of the things I had learned from my classes with Lee Brown, and he was known as the father of community policing, was that if female former inmates were going to be successful in reconnecting to the community, supports had to be in place. Support was essential prior to their arrival, and the advisory board was one way that we started to make change and pave the way for them. This was great, groundbreaking work, and I enjoyed it immensely. Yet I was working in a system in which you could count on one hand, the number of black people or any people of color working in the field. I had written a paper on locating transitional programs in communities in order to make them a win for everybody. These were also the days of Not in My Backyard. I was very proud of this paper. It had received an A. I had the book learning, but I also knew my community very well. I knew precisely how to put these things together. I had a supervisor named Manfred Moss, who, as part of the interview for the job, expressed interest in anything I wrote. He saw the paper, liked the paper, used the paper for his own benefit. Having my work appropriated was a searing learning experience. I now realize that I had to pay careful attention to what I knew and exactly how I shared it at the workplace. I needed to convey authority without ceding that same authority to others. Don't let anyone diminish what you bring to the table, or steal it either, was the lesson I learned. An update on my women's studies experience. Today, and I'm now reading from the section of the book that is the postscript. And I appreciate your attention so much to my reading. Thank you. Today, my courses at Portland State University have focused on African American leadership, public policy, and community development. I so enjoy mentoring young people and emerging leaders who have a heart for public service. It is my hope to be a part of developing the North Star Leadership Development Institute at PSU, named for Frederick Douglass' anti-slavery newspaper, The North Star, by one of my mentors, Dr. Darrell Milner. My commitment to the Institute idea brings full circle a journey of service and learning deeply inspired and shaped by Black studies at Portland State University, which the renowned scholar educator Milner helped found. I am deeply grateful to Melody Rose of Portland State University and to the Oregon State University Press and the thoughtful editorial board and staff, particularly Thomas Booth and editor Joe Alexander, for the respect and value assigned to the work that this book represents. And I am so grateful for an absolutely amazing learning experience. In this work, too, I honor Mrs. Vivian Richardson. One day after a meeting of the African American Alliance Unity Breakfast at the Irvington Covenant Assisted Living Center, I stopped in to visit with Mrs. Richardson. She was a resident and longtime Black United Front member and former secretary of that organization. We shared memories about Portlanders Organized for Southern African Freedom, or POSAF, as it was known, and Black United Front. And as we parted, she looked me directly in the eye and said, "Don't forget our people." Her words were electric and went directly to my heart. A favorite African proverb says, "When the heart is full, it comes out through the mouth." And so it is. Thank you so much. And at this point in our program, Patricia and I would love to hear your comments, your questions, and we'll share responding to them. And again, thank you all so much for being present and for attending so well to the words I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, stand up. So
So when you were talking about being in the Black Studies program here in the beginning, in the 70s, and talking about I can't remember the colors,
cool.
you know, the different. Was it only African American students in there, or was it a mixed class?
a mix of students, and the same is true today. In our Black Studies courses, we have students from across disciplines. What they have in common and what they share with me and our other Black Studies faculty, and I see one of our faculty in the back, Pedro, I called your name earlier, is that they question why they haven't, why the information was not revealed to them before arriving at the university. What was the disconnect that prevented them from getting the information and the knowledge in their public school experience? That's what they have in common. Amira?
Could you talk about the decision to leave the State Department of Corrections?
At the time I decided to leave corrections, I was just absolutely burned out, is the term, burned out. I had been doing my job and also serving as the correcting influence in the organization that I was part of. I was dealing with institutional racism, individual acts of racism, and it over the period of 4 years it took its toll. It took its toll on me, and I needed to go home and heal from the experience. I can tell you that on my first day showing up for my assignment in parole and probation, this was the old office on Northeast Gleason Street. The supervisor acted like he didn't know that I was going to be a part of the team. There was no office for me. And so what they wanted to do was set up an office in a hallway. And there's more in the book. Get the book. Just some really unreal, outrageous experiences that I had. And again, a part of my work was trying to get the system to deal with, at that time we were calling it cultural sensitivity and awareness. And I was identifying people in the community who had expertise, who could come in and help the organization better serve the clients, and there was resistance. There was a resistance to that. Ed?
Did you ever have the opportunity to challenge the gentleman that stole your idea and made success out of it?
I didn't, and I don't know what he did with the information, to tell you the truth. I know that he used it in some form. How, I don't know, but it was one of those lessons along the way. One other thing I didn't mention, I didn't read the passage, and this goes back to the time that I graduated from Portland State University. I graduated the same day that Richard Nixon resigned from office. And so in our ceremony was a summer graduation ceremony in the park blocks right outside of Smith Center. So as we were getting our fake diplomas, they didn't really give you your diploma at the time until they made sure you paid all your. Former Representative Joanne Bowman. How you doing, Joanne? Good to see you. So as we were crossing the stage out there in the park blocks, brilliantly sunny day, some of us scooted into Smith Center because TV was on and history was unfolding. Richard Nixon resigning from office. I had been watching the Watergate hearings over the course of the summer, and like many Americans, was just caught up in that history and drama as it unfolded, but also in the voice of Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan's voice really spoke to me. Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, no longer living. If you don't know her life story, you must read about her life. There's a book written about her, I believe it's called An American Hero, and then she wrote her own autobiography, Barbara Jordan. Yes?
I have questions. Thanks so much for your reading.
Thank you.
You said, Avel, that when you were first on campus, and this is in the early 70s, that there was this kind of feeling that as a black woman from Portland in particular, it's almost like a triple form of oppression. I'm wondering if you could speak to that now for black women today on this campus and how things have changed or not changed.
I can't say they've changed that much, which is the kind of the rude awakening every day. I think we still experience the muting of our voices. And some of it comes out in this way. I'm going to go to my experience in the legislature and try to marry it with my experience here. When I was in the legislature, I had some colleagues who were surprised that I could talk about or wanted to talk about issues that didn't have anything to do with black people, black community, black. I mean, I served on the Energy Policy Review Committee. I served on the Hanford Waste Board. I authored environmental justice legislation. Joanne can speak to this dilemma as well. There's this pigeonholing that takes place. We're not seen as people who can address or who have a worldview or a perspective about world issues. I can remember sitting in the lounge at the as a member of the House. Am I answering your question? Okay. And the chair of the committee, wonderful man, came to love him dearly, the late Chuck Norris. He was from Hermiston, Oregon. And he came to me in the House lounge. And I don't want you to get a picture of a lounge that, it's got some perks and nothing like that. Chairs are raggedy, the floor needed to be, anyway. But Representative Norris said, I owe you an apology. And I said, what do you mean? And he went on to say that he had stereotyped me, that when he had heard that I was going to be assigned to his committee, he wondered, what in the world could this woman from Northeast Portland possibly know about water policy? And why had he been assigned, Gordly as a member of the committee? his apology, in his apology, he went on to say how much he thought I brought to the community process. He commended me on the way in which I framed questions, my balanced view of looking at the urban-rural issues that were at play. And again, he came to me with this apology. And it was a very humbling experience. And I came through that conversation with a great deal of respect for him, because it took courage and humbling on his own part to even come forward and make that kind of confession. And I appreciated it then, and I appreciate it now that I can draw on that experience. Is that it? Okay. Kay.
Yes, Avel, it seems to me that it's still very difficult for us to have conversations about race in our community, in our society, even in our neighborhood. And I say that even more so today than I might have even 4 years ago, because of the way that President Obama's being treated in the media. He's not emotional. He's not loud. He doesn't show feeling. That's not who he is.
Yes.
He's not allowed to be who he is without that kind of evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your experience here at Portland State and in other communities when you're trying to talk about race?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, and I'm going to kind of put Phil on the spot here, because I know that he'll let me do this. It has
Always have.
It has a lot to do with the respect that I have for Phil and some of the work he's done around open primary and making government more transparent and all of that. Okay. I thought, you heard me say earlier, that I thought when I came to Portland State I was going to come as faculty in the Hatfield School of Government. I had that in my head. I had that on my mind. I had made a call to the school to even inquire about what might be possible. There was no real follow-up. There was no real connection. There was nothing happened to extend a further conversation. On the other hand, I was in this room in 2004, had delivered the keynote to the multicultural students' graduation ceremony. This room was packed. Students, parents, community people, the energy, the excitement, the pride, it was just so present, so present. And I remember as I was stepping away to talk to a group of students, in my head and in my heart, I'm thinking, I've got to come back to PSU. I have some work to do. I want to do it here. I'm feeling a sense of urgency about wanting to pass on everything I've learned, all that I know about public service, servant leadership. I want to come and do the work here. And I said it to Darrell Milner, to Dr. Milner, and I said to him, and I want to come and do the work with the Hatfield School of Government. And he said, no, you've got to come with us. Please come and do the work with Black Studies. And so that's how that happened. And my experience has been that there's no intentional bridge that exists yet that brings the work that we do in the Black Studies Department together with the work that happens in the Hatfield School of Government. When you have people like, well, I'll give you an example of something that just happened recently, and Ed was a part of this. The Urban League of Portland, and Joanne was a part of this as well. We had the civic engagement workshop, 2 days. sponsored by the Urban League. And the idea was to create an opportunity for people of color and others who are interested in public service, running for office, serving on boards and commissions, to come and hear how to get started, how to start making the connections to get on that track. And so we invited Ed Washington, served on Metro Council, Joanne Bowman, served in the legislature, Loretta Smith, just elected to the county commission, Lou Frederick, now serving in the state legislature. Who am I leaving out? Joanne. She was assigned, she's working with the Urban League on another project in the same vein.
I'm having a senior moment.
I can relate. But what we invited all these folks of color who had served or who had run and had the opportunity to serve, and we said, tell your stories, share your stories. And as this was happening, I was aware of the fact that this is the kind of thing that ought to be happening on this campus. That's what I want to say to you, Phil. That folks like Ed and Lou and Bob Boyer and Kay's run for city council, I mean, all these people who've had the experiences of running and doing it successfully, we need to get those experiences, we need to hear about those experiences on this campus and weave those experiences into the work that we do in the Hatfield School and also in political science. Am I putting you on the spot, Phil, if I ask you to respond to what I've just said? Does it make sense to you?
It's a great conversation. I'm pretty new here. But love to have that conversation with you and others.
Yeah.
It's real important. And we don't forget all the people at the school board,
yes,
council level,
exactly,
commission level. There's elected offices by the thousands, and it's important to get more and more people into those offices too and hear their experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say about the Urban League experience is that 35 people came for the 2 days. And Ed, I know you remember the energy in that room, as well as Joanne. I mean, people were literally hanging on to every word. And we started with the story of Shirley Chisholm. We shared the film, Unbought and Unbossed. Unbought and Unbossed. How many of you have seen that film? Highly recommended. Is there anyone here who doesn't know the name Shirley Chisholm or hasn't heard her story? That's good, that's good. Because her story is about service, servant leadership. It's not just politics and the game of politics, it's about service. And it's about character, and it's about integrity. It's about serving the people. It's about courage. And it's about being unbought and unbossed. You want to add anything? Thank you. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you both to Avel and Patricia for your presence, and in particular to Avel for sharing the power of your words this afternoon. It's a real pleasure. A few more thank yous. I want to acknowledge the work of Jennifer Wilkerson, who's helped us bring many of the pieces of Avel's archive here this afternoon and evening, and I hope you'll all get a chance to look at these things. It's just a taste, I think, of what is in the archive, and it's just a real treasure for the university and the region and the world, really, for us to have those things here at Portland State for all of us to learn from. Also, I want to thank my friend, Nova Newcomer, for all of her work on this event and many other things that we do at the center. Thank you very much. And I would invite all of you to stay and get a book. You have to have the book. And by all means, I know that Avel and Patricia would welcome the opportunity to sign your books. So we invite you to do that and chat with them and have some refreshments, and do take a look at the materials from the archive, because it's truly a treasure. And we're fortunate to have a piece of it here tonight. So let's just join in one more round of thanks to Avel. And thank you all for coming.